describe our view with one short phrase, it would be geopolitical risk. I think the world is on the edge of catastrophe. Um, I think the war in Ukraine is not going well for the West, and there is substantial risk of massive escalation. I think the situation in the Middle East is a powder keg. I think significantly underreported events in the Middle East this week include what appear to be an Israeli bombing of an Iranian consulate. And this is the type of thing that can be a match to fuel. And I think you're seeing that in the price of oil, where I saw Brent just crossed $90 a barrel, even though we have what amounts to a primary energy supply glut in the other markets, including natural gas and coal. And one can only ascribe the $40 to $50 barrel risk premium that we're seeing in the markets by our estimation to geopolitical risk. And I would frankly say that I'm concerned. I think we are sleepwalking into World War III. I note with interest that President Biden and Xi Jinping had a phone call this week, initiated by the U.S. apparently, at least according to the Chinese readout. And the military leaders of France and Russia had a phone call apparently that didn't go so well. I don't think the general public or the average investor realizes the very dangerous game that is being played right now and the risks that those present. And I think the trade-off in the S&P late this week, which happened when a few geopolitical risk headlines hit the wire, is testimony to the fragility of the state that we're in today. And I would say we are cautious. We would be in risk preservation mode. And we are frankly concerned about where we're headed. So that would be where our team sits today.
Yeah. So
Real World Asset Wealth: How to Protect Your Wealth from the Upcoming Financial Impact. Download this brand new report for free and get instant access to our resources. Click the button below the video now.
average investor kind of being aloof to everything that's happening, what should be on the radar screen for the average investor right now?
Well, I think, again, like if we're going to declare war on Russia, it feels like we should have a debate in Congress about it. And we just assume that we will win these wars. You know, we wrote a piece about how, you know, we sort of did a deep dive into the sort of real-time information you can get about the front line and the zone of contact and how things were going. And you contrast what's readily available to learn open source on the internet with how things are being reported. And we're basically being lied to, like openly lied to about what's going on. And the consequences of those lies are real and substantial. And it's kind of like the perfect storm. It's the decay of our democracy. It's the difficulty with which truth is able to be come by in the modern news cycle, propaganda wars. And it's just, yeah, I think if people were aware, like Russia's a permanent member of the UN Security Council. They have the largest inventory of sophisticated nuclear weapons in the world, including bigger than the US. What are we doing? Like, how did we get here? Let's take a pause. Let's take a beat and consider the long line of actions that we have took, participated in, responded to, and how we ended up on the cusp of World War III. What amazes me is how few people are even bothered by it. And like, we're just going to wake up one day and we're going to be in a hot kinetic war between NATO and Russia, or Israel and Iran are going to be in a hot kinetic war, which undoubtedly will spread to us and get us involved. We're probably going to be at war with China over Taiwan. Like, how many nuclear superpowers do we need to be involved in kinetic wars with before we begin to ponder whether the wisdom of the integral of all of our choices that got us here was wise? Like, I don't know. I'm thoroughly baffled by it, to be honest with you. It's amazing to watch in real time. When the history of this era is written, I look forward to reading it. I hope I'm still alive to read it. But it is really just an amazing time. We like to sort of develop models, and they're basically hypotheses that allow us to interpret news flow in original ways. And we've been playing around with a model right now, which is going to sound weird, but we have a hypothesis that there's actually a civil war going on in the U.S. today. And we would broadly put the camps into the Department of Defense and, let's say, CIA, Wall Street on the other side. And this is a concept that originated from some of our reading of Luke Groman's great work over at Forest for the Trees. The military has long been frustrated with the hollowing out of the U.S. manufacturing base and the need to outsource so much to China as part of the sort of U.S. dollar reserve currency phenomenon, whereas that has been, the cornerstone of Wall Street financialization for decades. And so if we put the two sides at odds with each other, then some of the headlines we see begin to make more sense. Like, for example, the fact that the Secretary of Defense hid his illness from the Biden administration, which was a little bit of a scandal here for a few days. Makes sense if you think that the DoD doesn't want to project any weakness in DC because they're worried that people who are a bit more war hungry than they might take advantage of that situation, for example. Now, this is all very speculative. I'm an outsider. I've never, I have no idea whether this mental model of a tug of war, let's say, perhaps a little softer than a civil war, is going on within the U.S. because the DoD understands the consequences of what the political leaders are driving them towards, and I think they're expressing their disapproval of it. And so we'll see. I mean, there are certainly still wise statespeople, diplomats in the U.S. and in the West, but they don't seem to be controlling events right now, at least not to any extent that we can find. But I bet you that if you pulled aside the senior leaders of the U.S. Department of Defense, they would express significant concern about recent developments and our capacity to cash the checks our political leaders seem to be writing. Yeah, so when we observe things that we really can't understand, our first assumption isn't incompetence. It's we must be missing some critically important piece of information. I don't know what that is, but that's kind of where I am. Like, I don't get it. I see Secretary of State Blinken saying earlier this week that Ukraine will be welcomed into NATO. That's basically a declaration of war on Russia. Like, shouldn't we be debating this in Congress? It's just sort of like, we all kind of know who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, right? Like that's an act of war. And the people behind that decision felt no need to submit themselves to any oversight before proceeding. That's very dangerous.